So tonight I want to continue the conversation from last night, focusing on concentration in meditation, and then we'll come back to see how it fits in with mindfulness and insight practices. The word that we translate as concentration is samadhi, and samadhi, that's both in the Pali and the Sanskrit. I actually don't think the word concentration, it's not a very good word. It's a fine word, but it has so many connotations. And if you go back to the root meaning, it actually means undistracted. And I think that's a better understanding. And it turns out there's more than one way that we can experience an undistracted mind. And so what I want to start with, but I'll use the word concentration now. That's the word that everyone uses, but we want to understand what we mean, because people talk, with each other and about each other and make comments on concentration, but people often aren't holding it with the same connotation, the same meaning. And especially sometimes we'll make, be critical or of others, and they think they mean one thing about concentration. It may not mean what the other person means. So this undistractedness, there's a couple of ways it's actually a big world, but there's two main ways that an undistracted mind can evolve. If you did any practice such as mindfulness of breathing, which is what we've been doing here, and you kept bringing your mind back to your breath, or coming back over and over every time you wandered away, which is what we're doing here, you're training your mind to, and we all find at some point, this may or may not be happening for you at this point on the retreat, but the mind becomes more steady. We're training it so that we come to a place where it's not wandering so much. It's not jumping around all over the place. And it's like building a muscle in the gym. Maybe you start off and maybe you're not that strong, but over time you keep coming back, you build that muscle, and things that used to be hard now naturally are quite easy for you. It's the same with this. By training the mind, coming back over and over, we find that the mind is able to stay connected just with this one thing, the breath. You get better at it, and we get better and better at it, so that if you took it far enough, your mind hardly wanders from the breath at all. It's really naturally, without having to do a lot of work or stress. It's actually an easeful place. We're naturally just staying right there, and the mind's very steady. This is an undistractedness. It's undistractedness on one thing. And if you took that same concentration far enough, you could become so good at staying connected on the one thing. They actually call it one-pointedness, because it's not literally a point, but it's a narrow focus just on your breath, say. You could become so good at it that you'd stop noticing other experiences around you. And you can take it far enough where at some point you literally will not lose you won't be connected with any other experiences. You can get to a place where you won't even feel what's going on in your body anymore, what's happening in your mind, and there'll just only be this samadhi. There'll be accompanying experiences, which I'm going to explain in just a few minutes. You can see lights, and it can be blissful, and there can be energies, things like this. And that's all there will be, because you've gotten, your concentration is so powerful that it excludes awareness of everything else. Basically, for you, the changing flow of experience has stopped, because you're not feeling all that. You're just kind of in a fixed concentration. This kind of samadhi has various names. You don't have to remember them all, but it's good to have heard them. It's called an exclusive concentration because you're exclusively on one thing. And also it excludes awareness of other things if you take it far enough. Now that's taking it quite far, but it's possible. It's sometimes also called one-pointedness, as I say, because you can get to the point where you're so undistracted, the mind is just steady and it's there on the one thing, one point. So one-pointedness, exclusive concentration. It's also, you could call it a disconnecting concentration in a sense. And I don't mean the word disconnecting to be negative in any way, but it disconnects you from, like I said, your other experiences in your body and the normal thought process and sounds and everything around you, kind of disconnected, I guess, as you could say, because, and there's just, for example, if you're seeing light and bliss, when you get like this, there'll only be light and bliss. And it's not bad. You won't be complaining if it happens. It's highly pleasant. So it's not a bad thing. And matter of fact, there's a lot of benefits that happen in that kind of samadhi. And the way I just described it, when you take it very far, is when some people's definition of jhana is getting to that point. So I'm not going to go right now into jhana much, but for now, I'm just going to name that. Don't worry for now about that, but there's many definitions of jhana. It turns out there's not just one jhana. So that's one kind of samadhi. If you, there's another way that this concentration can unfold, and I'm talking about naturally on its own, it can go in either of these two ways. It can fold in another direction where the mind continues to become undistracted and steady and present and not wandering away. But rather than being narrowly focused, maybe just on the point of the light, the bliss, or the breath, it's a more broad, and rather than being an exclusive concentration, it's an inclusive concentration because it doesn't exclude anything. Actually, it includes everything. So you can still experience other things. You may be so settled, there's not a lot going on to experience, but you're not, and it's not disconnecting, it's actually profoundly connecting because you're so concentrated and present. And so rather than what I said about the first kind of concentration, which is the one-pointed exclusive, in that one-pointed exclusive concentration, I said, for you, the flow of changing experience will stop. You won't experience it anymore if you took it really far. In this second kind of concentration, the flow of experience doesn't stop, the mind stops and is very still and steady. Now I'm using the term the mind, so I have to pause for a moment. I don't know what the mind is. We use that term for a lot. So I hope it's okay that I just sort of throw out the mind stops. There's an experience of mental stopping. And I'm just going to leave it at that. But I'm quite aware I'm being a little loose in using that term because there's a lot of connotations. What do we mean by the term the mind? But I just want to name that I know I'm not going there. And let's just leave that aside for now. And there's a quote, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think I can get it pretty close to try to describe this second inclusive kind of samadhi. It's a quote from Ajahn Chah, and you may have heard this famous quote about the still forest pool. I'm not going to get the quote exact, but this is pretty close. Ajahn Chah said, "Make your mind like a still forest pool." He said something like you'll see many things come and go. All kinds of rare and wonderful animals will come to drink at the pool. You will see many things come and go, but you will be still. So it's kind of gets a feeling of something. If you haven't experienced what I'm talking about in either of these kind of samadhis, don't worry about that for now. It may not make sense, but I just wanted you to have heard this because we're going to talk in a few minutes about some of the other things that can happen as the samadhi starts deepening, and this will, I think, start to make more sense. One way I think about this, this is an image I'm going to give you. I don't know if it's literally how the brain works. I'm not a brain scientist, but I think the image works. If you understand that there's certain a brain center or centers that come to when you come to a deep samadhi, a deep undistractedness, clear, steady presence, heightened awareness. Maybe that's a certain brain center. And then along with that, in the exclusive concentration, it also brings to quietude, it shuts down the other brain centers that allow us to have other experiences happen, feel your body, mental thoughts, all of that. In the second kind of samadhi, it's actually equally as deep and powerful. Whatever brain center that is that brings your mind to steadiness, presence, undistractedness, unwaveringness is the same, but we don't shut down the other brain centers, so all the other experiences can still come and go, right? And so you can see in this model, the first one that's kind of, we say it's disconnecting, it can be. In this second style, you can see how it could be the opposite of disconnecting. It's connecting, and it's actually powerfully connecting, right? Because we're so clear and present, so undistracted, that our mind is able to perceive what's going on in our bodies. Our awareness is so sensitized. If anything, even subtler that we may not have even noticed before, actually become clarified. And one way I talk about it, it's like turning your mind, you could say turn your mind into a electron microscope, really zoomed in, or the opposite image also works, turns your mind into a Hubble telescope, quite vast. And I think either image works. So I'm continuing to try to talk because I'm trying to use words that may not make much sense if you haven't experienced it. But just for now, know that there are two main styles of how the samadhi can unfold. This one-pointed, exclusive, and again, it can be disconnected, kind of in a narrowly focused kind of concentration. And there can be kind of a broad, open, inclusive concentration. So we'll leave it at that for now. These are, you can see there are two different ways that the mind can be undistracted on a point, or undistracted where it's not being moved around and jerked or going off. It's present. It's never distracted by the things that are arising and passing away within awareness. It's kind of like that. So that's the samadhi itself. But along with the actual undistractedness, there is quite a range of accompanying experiences that come. Some of you have had some of these, and I'm going to name some of the kind of things that can happen as we get more concentrated. Keep in mind that it's highly individual, and it's a wide range of what can happen, and it's not just one way. So it's pretty vast landscape. The kind of things that can happen is you start to feel more calm, you feel more steady and present. You start to sometimes a stillness or a sense of peace, and it's very strong. It's not like saying, well, I think I might be more calm. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. I'm not disparaging that, but this is palpable and strong and powerful. Peace, stillness, calm, steadiness. You'll know it if that's happening. Sometimes there can be a sense of, you can feel very expansive. Doesn't have to happen, but it can come. Sometimes we feel so expansive. I've had experiences. This happened to me. I remember I was on a very long retreat, and I went through a period of, I think maybe a couple of weeks, where it felt like my body was filling the whole room. It was so strong and real. And I remember thinking, there's no way my body's actually expanded and filled the room, but it feels like it's filled the whole room. I better open my eyes and check. And then I'd open my eyes, and sure enough, it's just me sitting there like normal. And then I close my eyes, and I've got this feeling. It's just was as powerful, as real as if it actually had physically happened. Those kind of feelings can come. Energies can move either in the body, or energies can be moving. It's not necessarily clear where they're located. It could be more of a mental thing, but just a feeling of energetic movement. And these energies can be, even when we're deeply concentrated, they don't have to be very powerful. They can be kind of light and smooth, or they can be very powerful. And in fact, they can be pleasant or unpleasant, because when things like this happen, sometimes it's too much. And it's like we've touched on, electric wire or something, and are getting too much going through us. And I'm not to worry you. It's like these things can happen. They're easy to work with them when they do happen. There's lots of ways where we can smooth the energy out and everything, but it can be that way. It's not that you have to worry that they don't just come out of nowhere and hit you, but they can start to build. And one of the things we want is the tools to work with these when they get strong, but they may not. Some people see lights, and which can be just kind of diffuse lights, or very specific, like it looks like there's a disc in front of you of different colors or whatever. Sometimes there can be sparkles. All kinds of visual effects can happen. Sometimes people hear sounds. I've heard people say, "Oh, I'm hearing celestial sounds." I haven't had that experience. I'm not sure what it would be, but you can beautiful sounds can come, and it can be very pleasant. This feeling of pleasantness, you'll hear this term sometimes called piti, P-I-T-I, piti, and which is normally translated as bliss. Another one, sukha, which is translated as happiness, or smoothed out, more pleasure. In the early suttas, the word piti is used a lot to accompany concentration, but it's never defined in the early text at all, not one place. They just use the term. I'm sure they had a common understanding back then of what they meant, but it was not defined. And it was only centuries later in this text called the Visuddhimagga that it really defined piti quite in their system. And it would be very intense, and there's all kinds of piti. And basically, it was a pretty strong feeling of energies or bliss. It would be a good word. Now, but even in the deepest stages of samadhi, what we mean by piti, I put that in now because you'll hear it a lot. In case you hear it, it's not always this strong bliss. For many people, it's just very sweet and smooth and light, even in the deepest stages. So again, it's highly individual. Just depends. I don't know what causes it. Maybe just how we're somatically wired up in the body, our nervous systems. I don't know why. I can't say, but it's not just one way. So how blissful you feel has nothing to do with it's an accompanying experience, but it's not a sign of how undistracted or concentrated you are. So I named a range of the kind of experiences that can happen when we get concentrated, no matter what style of undistractedness we have. When you go into the first kind of concentration that I was talking about, the kind of the one-pointed, narrow kind, and I said it could be disconnecting. To expand on that now a little more, what can happen is these accompanying experiences of the samadhi. By the way, just as a shorthand, the samadhi is actually the undistractedness itself. But as a way of speaking, when I say the samadhi, I'm going to talk about all these other experiences, the energies, the lights, the bliss, whatever, just as a way of speaking. So you know what I mean when I say the samadhi. When you can go into that undistracted one-pointedness and you disconnect from the feelings in your body, all that will be is the samadhi itself, however you experience it. So if it's a light or bliss, you'll see a blissful light, maybe, and you want to, There's a feeling, want to go into the light, say, if that's how you manifest. And if that happens to you, it's good. It feels really nice, and you won't be complaining. It'll feel good. And then there's just a steady place of being in bliss and light, for example. When you're in this more inclusive, open samadhi in which you have not disconnected, the samadhi experiences go into that. So if you become more connected into the experience of your body than ever, and all the samadhis get suffused through your body, and you haven't disconnected from your body, but for example, the body can feel like a body of light or bliss, for example. And in a way, these two types of samadhi can end up kind of in the same place because they feel similar, but one of them left the body behind and one of them comes through the body. And in fact, one of the tools or techniques for going into these deeper states, especially the ones called jhana, don't worry, I'm getting ahead of the instructions, but just to name it, is you actually consciously bring and suffuse with your mind the samadhi through your body. That's a classic technique to use, and you're purposely embodying it. So I realize I'm just trying to name a few things. It may leave more questions than answers, but getting into the details of how we practice isn't so much what I want to focus on right now. I just want to name some of these so you've heard it and have a sense, and you'll see how it applies in just a few moments when we bring back in the insight side of the practice. Over the course of this retreat, starting tomorrow morning, I'm going to start moving the instructions to include what happens when the samadhi starts developing. Right now, so far, we've just been connecting with the breathing and maybe switching to mindfulness with breathing when we connect to other experiences. Tomorrow, we'll start bringing in what happens when we start having some samadhi. That may or may not be happening for you. Everybody's moving at their own pace. But to serve the retreat, I'm going to move the instructions along in a standard way. And also, if there's things going on, this is the time you might either be on your own or you talk to someone. You talk to me, maybe you have another teacher or someone, and can get into more specific what's actually going on for you and how best to work with it. So let's let that samadhi piece stay just for a moment. I'll come back in just a few minutes, but I want to come back, bring back in the insight side of the practice for a moment. I touched briefly yesterday that there are different models for how one comes to this awakening or enlightenment or liberation that the Buddhist teachings are talking about. And so one of the models is that, this is kind of a repeat from yesterday, is that we have insights. You have to have insight into the nature of your own mind and body. We see that we're changing processes. We're not kind of fixed entities. We have insight into the nature of the outer world too, right? In or out of everything, of everything. And we see that it's insubstantial, it's all changing. That's why we learn not to cling to things, because it creates dukkha, suffering, and even about clinging or identity as self, a fixed self, because we have a self, but it's a changing process, right? That's the idea. And so there's a lot of teachings out there that says you have to the only way to get this liberation is having these insights. And that's you'll hear that a lot. So that's a whole path of practice. And the idea being that if you have a concentrated mind, and then you can see now, if you've got a concentrated mind, if it really does turn your mind into an electron telescope or a Hubble electron microscope or a Hubble telescope, you could see how if you were doing insight practices where you were turning the mind toward changing experience, you'd really be able to mentally kind of penetrate into the nature of that profoundly. And the idea then you can really have some deeper perceptions about it or realizations about it. And the idea of that is if we really get that deeply, the mind will let go of clinging, because we'll see there's nothing really that you can cling to. You can try, but it just creates suffering. That's the idea about having insights to lead us to what you call an equanimity, or what's called a liberation through non-clinging. And as I said, it's a whole branch of the path of liberation, highly respected, very powerful, and is the path for many people. The only mistake I think that gets made is it turns out it's not the only way to get the liberation. It's a powerful, big part of the whole side of the practice is through what's called insights. And you can see now that if you think, every time you hear the term concentration, if you think what it means is the one-pointed exclusive concentration where you lose connection with change, that first kind I talk about, if that's what you mean when you say the term samadhi, and if you think that the only way to get liberated is to get insights into change, then you can see why some teachers say, oh, if you do concentration, you're not doing insight. In that understanding, that would be true. You're doing a particular kind of concentration that cuts you off from those kind of insights into impermanence, for example. And so you don't have that. That's the reason why you will sometimes hear teachers saying that, oh, there's concentration meditation and there's insight, but you're doing one or the other. The concentration can help, but really you want at some point turn specifically and do these insight practices. All right. That's the reason. It comes out of a model of, not in the Pali Suttas, but the later Visuddhimagga is where that model comes from. There are other models in the Visuddhimagga, but that's where that comes from. And so that may be your best path, the one you're used to, what feels right for you, and you see the fruit and benefit for yourself, you'll want to continue that. But it may be, and you can see how developing, then you'll want to develop a certain amount of concentration in that model, but you wouldn't want to take it too far. You can get very concentrated and undistracted, but you don't want to lose connection with change. So you stop before you go any further than that, and you turn to do these insight practices, and there are many mindfulness practices, insight practices in its many forms. That's one whole path. Here's another whole, by the way, these are gross sort of rough cuts in how I'm separating out the paths. There's hundreds, who knows how many styles of practice and methods, and that they blend all these in different ways. But this just gives you a rough idea. What about this second kind of samadhi that's inclusive? In that kind of samadhi, first of all, even if you're holding the insight model that says you want to stay connected, even if that's your model, you want to stay connected for insight and feel impermanence. If you develop the second kind of samadhi, inclusive, you don't have to do some other kind of practice called insight. The insight's right there in the samadhi. You take the samadhi as far as you want, as much as you can become undistracted. The further you take it, the more powerful your awareness is into the nature of all things. You're like the clear forest pool of Ajahn Chah, making your mind like a clear forest pool. You'll be clear, steady. All kinds of wonderful animals will come to drink at the pool. All kinds of experiences will come and go, but you will be still. Right? That's an equanimity, the same kind of equanimity that hopefully comes from the insight practices when you really get it about, say, change, impermanence, for example, or other insights. And hopefully the mind then lets go and you've come into a balanced place, a presence, a wakeful presence, and equanimity, and you're resting in the stream of non-clinging. Well, the same thing happens here, but it's within the samadhi. You don't even have to shift. That's the way I'm trying to, this kind of samadhi. I'm totally fine whichever kind of samadhi you want to do. There's a lot of benefits on the other also. It's all good. I actually think a lot of insights come in that first kind of samadhi, and it's not true that you've lost connection. It's subtler. That's a different conversation. But I would say in this second kind of samadhi, we want to cultivate, I haven't talked about how to do it, but we want to cultivate that stays connected. And you get everything. You get all the bliss, all the pleasant stuff, all the energies, like however it's going to be for you is no less. But along with all that, we haven't disconnected from anything. When you get deep into this second kind of samadhi, the inclusive, things settle out so much that there may not be much going on to feel in your body and your mind, but you know that they're there, and if there is something, so that's that path, right? But even more, not only can you get the insights while you're in the samadhi, but for many people, the path opens in a way that doesn't feel to them like it's, I mean, you always will get some insights. You can't help if you bring mindfulness and you bring steadiness of mind and presence and all this, you're going to have many insights into your own mind and body and into the nature of things. It just can't be avoided. But you may not get these classic insights, dramatic kind of things. But for a lot of people, the path of liberation, they wouldn't, even though there's got to be some insights, they wouldn't articulate it that way. They don't experience it as having had insights. Just through the steadying of the mind, you go into a place of the same kind of equanimity, balance, presence, wakefulness, and you're in the same stream of non-clinging, but it just came out of the samadhi, led you into a profound equanimity and stillness. And that's a whole nother way that this path of liberation can happen. And it's a different model than the people saying, oh, you have to have this thing called insights. That's fine for them to teach that way. That's their system. But there's no have to have. The way we bring all this together is each of us, we undertake the practice. And the way I'm offering it here is we're emphasizing developing the concentration. We're putting a lot into how can I take the concentration as far as I want. By the way, it's an interesting thing. Sometimes you'll hear people who kind of de-emphasize concentration they'll say to you, "Oh no, don't get too much into concentration. You're going to get attached and clinging." You'll hear that all the time. That's the worry. And it is highly pleasant. And you could kind of cling to it. And if you do, it's okay. You suffer a little and you learn. It's not a big deal. We'll pull you out. Don't worry about it. But it's interesting to me that so much emphasis is put, you take the Eightfold Path, the last and final element of the Eightfold Path, it's not insight, it's samadhi. The culmination of the Eightfold Path. Samadhi in this text, the Buddha, he didn't really say do insight, he said do jhana, actually, when you go look. But you can find the path of insight in the suttas too, it's all there. All of these wholesome qualities are important. I don't hear everybody will say, oh, you want to develop your mindfulness, really take it as far as you can. Develop your loving kindness and compassion as far as you can. Take your insight as far as you can. Why wouldn't we want to do the same thing with the wholesome qualities of samadhi? Take our undistractedness as far as we can. That's what we're talking about. And it goes back, I meant to bring the quote here and I forgot again where the Buddha, I paraphrased when the Buddha said, when it comes to samadhi, he basically said something, when it comes to samadhi, it should not be avoided, it should not be feared. And he basically, to paraphrase, said, you should go for it. Really try to get strong samadhi. Matter of fact, there's another quote in which the Buddha is quoted as saying, there are 5 things that lead to the disappearance of the true Dharma. And he said it's lack of respect for the 3 refuges, for the Buddha, number 1, the Dharma, number 2, the Sangha, number 3, for the teachings, I forgot what number 4, and for number 5, one of the 5th thing that leads to the disappearance of the true Dharma is lack of respect and appreciation for samadhi. So, that's saying a lot. I'm giving a little sales pitch on the samadhi side, but my point is there's no amount we have to have. By the way, I'll just add one more thing here. Right samadhi of the Eightfold Path. The real definition in the suttas, it's very simple. It's the four jhanas. It's not trying to get them or heading towards them or getting kind of, it's the four jhanas. That's how it's defined in the suttas. People don't often realize that. Now that I don't like that. I mean, it doesn't matter because it's what the Pali Canon says. Maybe it doesn't matter whether I like it or not. But my point is, it's not helpful because then we think, oh, gee, I've got to get. Don't got to get. There's no got to get. I would say, this is just me, that right samadhi is any amount of samadhi you have, even just a little bit, if it's accompanied by the other elements of the Eightfold Path. Right intention, right understanding, right intention, want to have right view, right effort, right mindfulness. If those come in too, that's right samadhi. And so really right samadhi is always whatever amount we have, even if you don't think it's very much, because that's what's happening in the present moment. And what really matters is how we work with it. So here's my suggestion on how we practice moving forward. This is now kind of summarizing what I'm offering for this retreat, and you can try this on. We're leaning heavy on the mindfulness of breathing side. And we're going to give that quite a bit of emphasis. In fact, tomorrow, I'll already tell you now, I'm going to suggest that for those of you for whom the concentration is strong, we're going to stick with the same formal schedule, but if your body's cooperating, start sitting longer. If your mind's clear, you're not sinking and everything. As long as the samadhi's good, your body's cooperating, start sitting longer. And do the walking however long you need to make what your body needs and to rebalance your energy, and then get back to the sitting. And we're going to start emphasizing that sitting a little more. And we're going to start using the samadhi to help us strengthen it. And so we're putting a big emphasis on samadhi. As long as you keep in mind what I keep saying, you don't have to get anything. We want to apply ourselves well, but you don't want to overstrive. Be relaxed, be happy with however it is, but we're aiming at ourselves in a certain direction. And what we'll do is we'll look to see how the samadhi naturally unfolds. Most people naturally unfold in the direction that's connecting. You don't even have to think about it. We'll just continue in that way. You'll sign up for an interview with me. We'll talk about it. But even if the samadhi starts steering in a direction that we think is the disconnected and one-pointedness, if you choose to want to go in that direction, that's great. I'm all for it, and I can support you in that. But if you want to steer it back, there's easy ways to turn it in the other direction. Whichever way it's naturally evolving, you can steer it in the other direction on the samadhi. I'm not going to get into that. That's the practice details, which I can talk to you one-on-one, either during retreat or after retreat. You can let me know. We can chat about that. I'm just saying we can do that. So we're steering ourselves at deep samadhi, connecting style of samadhi. By the way, instead of being called exclusive, I forgot to say, this style is called inclusive because it doesn't exclude anything and it includes everything. Okay, so we're going to head to that kind of samadhi and we'll see for ourselves. It's not what anybody else says. What goes on when you're really in there? And I know plenty of people who, once they get that, they appreciate the power of what happens right in the samadhi. And we also know that on its own, there'll be the times when we're not concentrating. It's hard to meditate. We're suffering in some way. And we can really feel that rather than bearing down on the breath more and on the samadhi more, we really want to turn, it's going more back in a traditional insight direction. We want to let go of the breath and turn our attention to whatever else is going on. We've still got that in our toolkit when we need it. So that will come in sometimes too. And the way I say it is, it's like we're now before we were kind of leaning on the emphasis of the samadhi. Now we find ourselves naturally leaning on the insight side. And then we connect with whatever's going on, and we need to bring all the tools we have to work with whatever it is. Some suffering, how can I let it go? Can I let it go? What's its cause? Some difficulties in the body, memories, thoughts, moods. And we can bring in all the just traditional insight without having to think about the concentration. The power of our concentration will still come in with us to help us be more steady. And then when it settles out, or we just want to break, we'll just turn ourselves back, or when we're ready and we're back on the concentration side, and we just stay with that. And so in this way, by emphasizing the samadhi side, we actually end up getting all sides, both because we're developing the right kind of samadhi. So even when we're on the samadhi side, it's highly connected. We still get all the insight part there. And knowing that we don't cling to that, and we're quite hopefully willing and able and ready to turn our attention and let go and be on the insight side. And so we kind of move back and forth between these two emphases, concentration and insight, letting our present moment experience tell us. And in this way, if we can let go of our own agenda, however we think it's supposed to be, and simply stay open and receptive to what's actually going on. And then sometimes we don't know, it's not clear. That's okay, just go back to your breath, or choose to go on the insight side, is fine. It doesn't matter. Sometimes it is clear, and then we just follow what we know. And we make our best choice, and by doing that, unlike, how which tools we're using, which emphasis we're bringing in, we learn to trust our inner knowing, our inner teacher more, our inner guidance. And we learn more and more to distinguish, I said this the other day, to distinguish between our delusion and real wisdom and real discernment that's really in there that we want to learn through experience to come into. And so we're here really in a great experiment. We're doing the experiment to see what happens. And if you hold the experimental attitude, then you don't worry about what happens, because even if I don't really think, I don't like to say screw it up, but it can feel like that, but just as a way of speaking, even if we screw it up, that's teaching us. And then we learn, oh, wait a minute, I thought I was following my inner guidance, but you know what? I was just going around following my likes and dislikes, chasing after sense pleasures, and I thought I was whatever. And it just, the realizations come as we get more clear in our mind. We cannot see our own blind spots by definition. And we've all got blind spots, and we don't even know, right? You don't even know the blind spots. You don't even know we're there. Don't worry about it. By bringing the best we can, it's enough. And so I'm going to wrap up in just a few minutes here. I want to give you just an image that I think can help us feel more relaxed in the process. I'm not a musician, but I live in a family of musicians. My son's, he's quite an accomplished jazz trombone player. My wife plays piano and everything. So what I'm about to say for you musicians may not be exactly right, but forgive me if I screw it up, but you'll get the idea. If I sit down to play the piano, I have no skill. I don't know how to play. I mean, I can dink around and play hot cross buns or something like that. That's about it. Isn't it true that if you're brand new at playing a musical instrument, you actually don't have to be any good at it? You don't have to have any skill. And just by starting at a complete beginner, you don't need my finger. Even if someone tells me how to move my fingers, I haven't developed the muscles. They're just kind of stiff and clunky. But if I keep practicing, they'll become more fluid naturally. You'll build muscle memory. I'll be able to start reading. I've done this a little bit, so I know you can start to read the notes and my fingers know where to go. And starting from zero, from ground zero, we can take it pretty far. It's the same thing in our meditation practice. You don't have to be any good at it. Now, when I'm saying it that way on purpose because people will say they're no good at it, but actually, of course you're good at it. Anybody can feel wherever you want your breathing. Sometimes people say, oh, it's hard to feel the breathing, so they're doing something else instead. But whatever it is for you, like if breathing works for you, I may only be here for 2 breaths before I'm lost again for 10 minutes. But you know what? In those two breaths, of course, it's not a big deal. I know how to feel the breath. I just put my attention there. I can feel it. If nothing else, here, I take my two hands. I can feel them touching. I haven't worked on it or developed any skill about it. It's just there. So to say we're no good at it is not accurate. Of course, we can do the practice. We judge it because our minds aren't yet trained, and so things come up. We don't have the skills or the tools yet in our toolkit to know how to work with it, or the mind's wandering off, and we're judging ourselves by how well or poorly we're able to stay. We're lost in thought almost 99% of the time. It's okay. Just by using what you have when you do remember to be back is fully enough, even if it's 1% of the time. It doesn't matter. You will see for yourself that it will grow. So we shouldn't expect ourselves to be experts. It's a funny thing, like if it was the piano, nobody would judge themselves. They say, well, of course I'm no good at it. I've never played before. Why is it with meditation we're so hard on ourselves and expect that it's going to be better when we haven't trained our minds? So hold that same kindness to yourself. The good heart, this heart of love, this is the practice of loving kindness and the good heart for ourselves, even when we're doing something as simple as mindfulness of breathing. Be where you're at. Show up the best you can. It really is all you need. So thank you for your kind attention.